Welcome back to The Explainer. So, today we're looking into a fascinating and honestly a kind of unnerving phenomenon that's just hiding right in plain sight. We are going to uncover what researchers are calling the invisible watermark of anti-humanism. It's an idea that is currently deeply embedded inside our everyday pop culture and the digital ecosystems we all use. Okay, let's dive into this. Have you ever noticed how modern media so often frames us, humans, not as the stewards of the future, but as the ultimate villains? Just think about the last gritty sci fi show you binged, or that viral, cynical meme that popped up on your feed. There is this pervasive, underlying skepticism out there about our inherent value, and honestly, our future. And we aren't just guessing here. Researchers who have been analyzing everything from speculative fiction all the way down to dark internet subcultures have identified exactly 100 distinct anti-human subconscious assumptions circulating in American media right now. That is 100 different ways our culture is subtly whispering to us that humanity itself is the problem. Academics actually have a term for this. They call it ontological erosion. Basically, it's a profound skepticism toward the inherent value, agency, and future of the human species. You can kind of think of this erosion like a psychological mind virus. Every single time we engage with our screens, it is systematically downgrading our collective self-worth pixel by pixel. So, here is our roadmap for today's explainer. First, the rise of anti-humanism. Second, monsters, viruses, and doomers. Third, machines and mind attention. Fourth, toxic hierarchies and tropes. And finally, reclaiming our human potential. We're going to trace this mind virus through technology, ecology, and social subcultures to ultimately figure out a cure. Starting right off with Section 1, the rise of anti-humanism. And this brilliantly illustrates the historical shift in how humanity views itself. If you look back at the mid-20th century, the dominant cultural visions were highly utopian, right? They focused heavily on human progress, our ingenuity, and our role as stewards of tomorrow. But today, the media acts more like a dark mirror. Those shiny themes of progress have been widely replaced by narratives centered around inherent malice, biological obsolescence, and this heavy idea that humans are nothing more than ecological parasites. Which brings us to Section 2, monsters, viruses, and doomers. So the absolute most pervasive group of assumptions researchers found is called the moral depravity cluster. This is your classic humans are the real monsters trope. It basically tells us our primal nature is fundamentally depraved. You see this everywhere in gritty post-apocalyptic shows. It assumes moral inevitability, meaning if social order fails, we are definitely going to choose violence over cooperation. Then you have latent savagery, which is the idea that everyday civilization is just a super thin veneer masking our bottom-tier animal nature. It's constantly subtly convincing us that the fate of the world isn't determined by our best qualities, but by our absolute worst. And this mindset extends directly into how we view the planet itself. Remember those nature is healing memes that went absolutely everywhere during the COVID-19 lockdowns? The ones earnestly claiming dolphins were returning to the canals of Venice? Well, as researchers point out, these memes often push a fatalistic, almost eco-fascist idea that human absence is a strict prerequisite for planetary health. It pushes the assumption that humanity is quite literally a viral infection, and that global disasters are actually a welcome vaccine for the Earth. Now, taking this pessimism to its absolute extreme, we find the metaphysics of non-existence. This is heavily popularized by the doomer meme archetype you've probably seen floating around. This ideology, known as antinatalism, assumes existence as harm, the belief that simply being born is inherently harmful to the person experiencing it. It leans on concepts like the consent gap, which argues you couldn't consent to being born, framing birth itself as a violation. Ultimately, this mindset glorifies what researchers call the crystalline state, basically a lifeless, totally silent world that they view as the ultimate ethical ideal. The doomer meme visually validates this ideological nihilism, essentially giving people a free pass to just give up. That takes us to Section 3, machines and mind attention. In what's called the tech obsolescence cluster, we see how transhumanist and cyberpunk media subconsciously frame our physical, biological bodies as flawed, obsolete cages. Looking objectively at these tropes, concepts like the fleshy prison, the hollow body host, or the meat puppet illusion suggest that biological existence is really just a drag on the system. The narrative asserts that true freedom, or true superiority, can only be achieved by leaving our biology behind entirely and ascending to a purely digital or mechanical state. And this digital detachment feeds right into the attention economy. Here, human focus is algorithmically mined as a raw resource, literally just like oil or coal. Assumptions like algorithmic gatekeeping suggest machines are somehow better at choosing what we should value, which steadily erodes our cognitive autonomy. And then there's the engagement metric, which dictates that human value is best extracted through outrage and provocation. In this framework, your true intention as a complex human being is viewed merely as a barrier to your engagement. Let's just pause for a second and really let this striking quote from the research sink in. Our devices are consuming us, not the other way around. When our free time is treated as a total waste unless it's monetized, we experience a tragic loss of holistic human wholeness. It is an unrestricted mining of human consciousness that profoundly downgrades our psyche. Which leads into Section 4, Toxic Hierarchies and Tropes. Now, when we examine the data points surrounding extreme internet subcultures, like the black pill and incel communities, we find a very rigid biological determinism. The vocabulary here is brutal, but it functions as a clear taxonomy of anti-human assumptions. It includes things like LMS supremacy, the absolute belief that looks, money, and status are the only true metrics of human value. It heavily features rigid, dehumanizing archetypes and assumes that personality, character, and individual agency are all just illusions compared to pure physical determinism. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how this worldview maps out a highly specific concept of sexual market value. This subculture operates heavily on the 80-20 rule, a rigid assumption that 80% of women are exclusively competing for the top 20% of men. We're looking at these metrics neutrally here to understand how they construct a worldview of absolute systemic hopelessness. It strips all human interaction down to a cold, deterministic battle for dominance. But hey, it's not just the dark corners of the web doing this. Legacy mainstream media is highly complicit too. Mainstream entertainment relies heavily on lazy archetypes. Think of the bumbling dad, who can barely operate a toaster and lacks all agency, the damsel, who has absolutely zero autonomy, or the bitchy boss, which assumes power is entirely incompatible with kindness. These everyday tropes consistently strip normal people of their complexity, their dimension, and their relatability, which just further contributes to this collective downgrading of human value. Finally, Section 5, Reclaiming Our Human Potential. Let's zoom out here and synthesize all of this. The psychological costs of this continuous dark media diet are grave. First, we see a massive erosion of social capital, where trust in our fellow citizens declines to dangerously low levels. Second, there is a serious susceptibility to extremism, as people reject mainstream institutional values because of this ingrained misanthropy. A vacuum is created, and that vacuum is quickly filled by taboo, deterministic ideologies. And third, it leads to collective paralysis. Because, think about it, if we truly believe humanity is just a virus, there is zero incentive to strive for purposeful, collective change. So what is the cure? The research demands an urgent, conscious shift toward positive, humanizing narratives. We have got to actively move away from those lazy media archetypes and absolutely reject algorithmic imperatives that only prioritize our outrage. Reclaiming our agency means intentionally championing media that recognizes the plurality, the intent, and the very real potential of the human species. We have to demand a people-centered world again. And that leaves us with this final provocative thought. Will this anthropogenic abyss we see in the dark mirror become a self-fulfilling prophecy? Or can we wake up, reject these assumptions, and finally reclaim our humanity? Keep that question in mind the very next time you turn on a show or scroll through your feed. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and remember to keep questioning what you consume.